Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by my good friend, Dr. Philip Chase. Philip, hello.
Hello, AP. Thank you for this invitation to participate in this discussion on your channel, A Critical Dragon. It is a delight to be here.
It's been a while since we recorded a chat because obviously what people don't know is we contact each other and have chats, but we don't
Yes.
always record anything anymore because you're a semi-famous author now, working on becoming a famous author.
I don't know about that. Anyway, but yes, we get together most weeks and we chat. We don't always record, so the world will never know the brilliant things that we say to each other during during these discussions. But we'll give them this anyway, right? I mean, they deserve this much.
Yes, and despite
I don't
despite
know if they do. I don't know if they do deserve it, but we'll give it to them anyway.
I think inflicted upon them is quite possibly a better description.
Yeah, yeah.
But obviously, I've had a bee in my bonnet recently about different approaches to reading, different conversations about literacy and what it is that we do when we read. Because
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's a disconnect between when we talk about reading and when someone hears us talk about reading. Because in our heads, and I'm talking about the general sense of any of us when we talk about reading, we have an idea in our head what reading means, what we mean by reading, but that's not necessarily what someone else has in their head as the definition and the meaning and the understanding of it. So I,
Yeah.
I thought we would talk a little bit about different approaches to reading, different strategies of reading, the different types of books that lend themselves to that, or how you can hamstring yourself or sort of handicap yourself by applying the not the wrong but a non-neat fit to the book in front of you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So, if I may, since this is a discussion about literary analysis, perhaps I will offer a metaphor for this whole topic, which is going to the gym, right? So, when you go to the gym and you work out and you do that consistently for a period of time, you get bigger muscles, right? And I think it's very similar with just about anything, really. If you practice it, you get better at it. It's not a matter of native ability or anything like that, or innate ability. It's more a matter of practicing something and getting to know the terms. Like, say you and I go to the gym, AP, you and I are going to the gym, and they just let us loose in there, and there are all these machines and this equipment, and we don't know what the heck we're doing. I mean, that would first of all be a pretty funny scene, I think. Uh, Sorry. But but you know what I mean, right? And whereas if we make an appointment with what's the person called who tells you how to exercise?
A personal trainer.
Personal trainer. Yes, that's it. So if you and I make an appointment with a personal trainer who shows us how to use the equipment and the best way to, you know, do the exercise, because you don't want to just waving dumbbells around. You want to do it correctly to get the maximum benefit from it. See where I'm going
Well,
with this metaphor?
as
Yeah.
as Homer Simpson said, whenever you're bending down to pick something up that's very heavy, make sure that you bend down at the waist and then you twist as you try to lift it up, because that's definitely not going to ruin your back.
You must be a personal trainer.
And before anyone thinks that I am aware that that's not how you pick things up that are heavy, I was using the example of Homer Simpson. But
Homer, yeah,
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 I get this analogy. It's the way that sometimes I've tried to describe it is when we talk about reading, like people always talk about the speed at which they read as this
yeah.
sort of measurement at how good your reading is. And
That's like doing your exercises like this,
you could do things very, very quickly, but your technique might
Right,
not be great. And the thing is,
right.
oh, you might be really, really fast using the free weights, but then as soon as you get on an elliptical machine, it you try the free weight technique on the elliptical machine and it's not working. And then
Right.
someone goes, "Have you been skipping leg day?" And that's that's kind of where we can go with it. It's a bit like if you trained as who's the best runner in the world, and someone might point to someone who is 100-meter sprinter. They are the best. They are the fastest.
Right,
And you go,
right.
right. So this race is over 15 miles.
Very different.
Oh,
Yep.
who's the best runner? And you go, oh, this person. They train on marathons all the time. Well, this race is over 200 meters.
Yeah.
There are different lengths of races, and these people are athletes. They are really, really good at it. They train all the time, but they're training for a very specific focus, and that training does not necessarily always translate to other types of running. Now, a lot of the mechanics are the same, of making sure your posture is correct, making sure that your how your footfalls are happening and your balance and your breathing. All of these things, you can go, yeah, there are overlaps in this sort of Venn diagram of techniques and skills. But what you're focusing on is, well, on a marathon, you do not run the same way that you, or train the same way that you would for a 100-meter sprint,
Right.
and vice versa. But when it comes to reading, the metric that people talk about is, oh, well, how quickly can you read? How many pages can you read? How many books do you read? As if that metric is the metric for how good a reader you are.
Yeah, I mean, for every video on YouTube with the title something like how to read well or how to absorb what you're reading or whatever, you'll probably find 100 for how to read faster, how to read more books, which seems to be that's the more emphasized thing. And you know what? If that makes you happy, then that's okay. You know, if you just want to read for being in the moment, being entertained and all of that, then that's your cup of tea. Okay. But there is
And
this other way to do it, which is also very fulfilling, I think. And the more you do it, the more fulfilling it is, just like exercise.
and I will say, just before we move on to discuss that, if anyone wants to rack up the number of novels that they read in a year, if that is your sole focus, and you go, but I don't want to cheat, I want to read like one issue of the X-Men and say this issue, I'm going to count that as a novel. Clearly it's not, it's a comic, and it's fine. I like comics, I read comics. But if you're trying to increase your novel count, if you look at a lot of classic science fiction, classic horror,
Sure.
and classic
Yeah.
fantasy, a lot of these are incredibly slim volumes, and you can read them in a day. Like they are very slim, and some of them are actually incredibly good. But
Mm.
that's a way to read interesting literature that maybe you mightn't have approached before because they have shoddy looking covers or you're unaware of them. But you can blaze through a whole load of these and easily get up to a couple of hundred books in a year. And no one would ever gainsay that because these are novels. Like no one's going, oh, you're fudging your numbers. So if that's what you want to do, and that's how you want to do it, there's an easy way to increase the number of books that you read. And because they're from a different time period, they're dealing with different things. It's a nice way to get a completely different view of the genres that typically we read a lot of what's coming out now rather than where the genre came from. So it can be eye-opening seeing how a lot of these trends actually started or where ideas maybe came from and then have been developed over time and how the genre has shifted. So
Yeah.
it does double duty. It's actually quite interesting. But I just thought I would mention that since we're talking about the number of books that you read, there's a brilliant way to increase the number and still have really interesting reads.
Yeah. I also want to say that reading on a level where you're doing more analysis, it might feel intimidating to a lot of people, particularly if it's not something they've done before. And it might feel confusing for a bit, but it's really something that anyone can do. It's not a matter of intelligence or anything like that. It's just a matter of practice and knowing the terminology. Look, I teach intro to literature every semester. And the majority of my students, I asked them dumb questions like, how many of you like poetry? And usually 0 to 1 hand will go up. And it's kind of the response I expect because that's the response I always get. But by the end of the semester, I will have students tell me, I actually kind of like poetry and I think I'm going to read it more, and that's just like, wow, yes, you just made my day. And the fact of the matter is, it's not that they couldn't do it in the first place. It's just that they didn't know that it could be so enjoyable to dig into a poem or to a short story in the way we do in class. And that's the key thing, is practice every day in class and realize, oh, this is actually kind of cool. This really opens up this story in ways that I can really connect with. Or this poem now really speaks to me. This is an experience that resonates and explains a feeling that I've had all my life, but I never could put into words. That's a really wonderful thing. And I think that is something that's accessible to just about anybody.
And that is one of the great things about, say, literacy in general, which is it's not intellect dependent. And
No.
we have such access now to texts of so many different varieties, levels, styles, genres in multiple languages that it has never been easier to actually improve your own literacy without having to enroll in university or enroll in a course. Those things make it easier because someone explains something to you, then you practice it, and then you talk over it. And it helps because it's almost like a shortcut because someone is giving you the tips instead of you trying to work it out on your own. But
Right.
we live in a day and an age when this is actually something that we can all do, and it is readily available now, more so than at any other time in history. So,
Yep.
because I think one of the things that people seem to stumble on is they go, it's you're either literate or you're illiterate, non-literate.
Right.
You go, right, but like anything, it's can you run? Yes. So you can either run or you can't run. And you go, well, there are levels to how well you can run and
Right.
the style of running that you do. Like your analogy, going to the gym. It's like, do you go to the gym? Yes, I go once a week and I sit in the spa and relax. Right. But I went like, do you go and work out? Do you... Well, no, I sit there and I think about it because exercise is 90% mental. So I'm getting 90% of the goodness just by thinking about it. That's not what that
Wait, is that
how
what your personal trainer told you?
it's what my imaginary personal trainer would tell me if I had one.
Okay.
But literacy is an evolving skill. And if you think that when we start out reading and it's about recognizing letters, and then it's recognizing letters and constructing small words and then bigger words, and then working on the complexity about verbs, nouns, adverbs, adjectives, understanding grammar, understanding sentences, understanding paragraphs, and then ta ta ta, I can now read a novel.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond that. I mean, that's where a lot of us stop because that's as far as you get is in high school, you maybe start doing things like, do you recognize a simile? Do you recognize a metaphor? And can you point to these things? But the focus is very much on vocabulary. It's not about, in a lot of circumstances, it's not about understanding. It's not about improving the depth of your literacy. It's, do you have enough to follow nonfiction?
Yeah. And one of the things I love about this platform is that you do have, I think, a lot of people, and it's exciting to be here, by the way, much more exciting than most university classrooms. The people who are here because they want to be here. They're excited about reading. They're excited about stories. They want to experience them fully. And what we're talking about is a way of experiencing stories that is different from just reading on the surface level to see what happens. And it's exciting and it's fun. And I think as people discover that, and this is a great platform for that to happen, it's not the only thing we can do around here. There are people who like to talk about collecting books. There are people who like to talk about, getting rid of books. There are people who like to talk about all kinds of different things, book related, that aren't necessarily literary analysis. And that's great. But literary analysis is fun. It is exciting. It is enriching. And that's the thing that I enjoy the most, is being in these discussions and having these stories open up for me in ways because somebody gives me ideas that I hadn't seen because I lacked their experience, and they were able to perceive those things better than I was. And that's wonderful. That is just mutually enriching. So that is the exciting thing for me. That's the best part of the whole thing, really. There are books I've talked about with people many times on this platform where I emerged from that discussion loving the book way more than I would have if I had simply read it on my own. And so it's a wonderful community thing in that sense as well.
And the thing is, I worry that someone might think that literary analysis is somehow separate to reading, and it's all part and parcel
Right.
of literacy. Because I think what you're talking about in terms of literary analysis is providing the lexicon, the vocabulary for certain
Yeah.
terms and
Yeah.
concepts and ideas and ways to explain things. Because I know that when sometimes I'm talking about a book, and I do videos like this where I put a short piece of text up and then explain how it works. And
Right.
even recently, I'd put a bit of text up, and someone said, "But how can someone not have gotten this the first time they read it?" Because not everyone has the same ability to recognize these things. And if you don't have the words for it, if you don't have the concepts for what is going on, quite
Right.
frequently you you read through the piece and you're feeling these things, but you don't know why you are. You don't know how you are. You don't know how it's magical how this author made me do
Right.
this. How did I know that? And for instance, in a piece I discussed recently, it was, how do you know this person is from a barbarian tribe? It never says he is from a barbarian tribe. But by the
Yeah.
end of the three paragraphs, you know explicitly he is from a barbarian tribe. But it doesn't say that. Those words are not put in that order. You're not told that. So how do you finish these three paragraphs about something to go, where did that information come from? And it's about understanding how authors manipulate language, because
Yes.
how you tell a story, what you choose to show, what you choose to hide, how you choose to describe something, the words that you use can be incredibly telling. So if you have just a surface level about the direct information you're given and you read those paragraphs, you'd go, well, I still don't know what's going on. But someone who is more aware, and only slightly more aware, would go, huh, I'm reading about this tribe, this tribal person. How did I know that? And then the sort of the next level up is, this is how it works. Look at this word, and this word. Look at how they connect together. That's how this connotation has been created. That's how this information has been implied. And
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about here. That literary analysis is not some absolutely separate skill and technique. It is an evolution of what we already do, but it gives us the words and the tools and the concepts to be able to explain how certain effects are achieved.
Yeah. And plus, it would be really bad writing if I were to put in my story a character saying, I am a barbarian. Look at my barbarity.
Well,
So
I did tell you to take that line out.
you did, and I very reluctantly took it out. so, so I don't know how my readers are going to know that character is a barbarian now. you know but yeah, I mean, you slowly leak out little things that clue in the reader, and sometimes it's interesting the way it happens, because sometimes you're reading quickly and you don't even realize you've taken in information that's actually in there. What we're talking about is making that a little more explicit, just pausing to think, as you said, how do I know this? Often it's there already. It's just a matter of you unlocking it and thinking about, okay, oh, that's how I know, because of this description of the abode that the barbarian character lives in. It's described as a longhouse or whatever. So there's a clue that this is the kind of culture that we're dealing with here. And that's how you put things together. And that's all it is. Really, it's not rocket science, as they say. So,
And that's one of the great joys about improving your literacy, because it does make texts more and more accessible. Like, obviously, one of the book series that we've talked about quite a lot are the Malazan Books of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson.
right.
And people frequently talk about those as being very, very complex and difficult to understand. And yet you and I we read them and go, what's difficult? Like, there's complexity to it, and there's lots of these different moving parts, and it's really interesting and engaging, but it's not a barrier to understanding. That it's not complex in that sense of this is difficult. It's complex in the sense of this is nuanced and rich, and it has lots of stuff in it to pull apart and look at. That it's exciting. But part of that is our training, our background. And we cannot take it for granted that everyone has similar educational backgrounds and experiences to us. That would be patently ridiculous.
Right.
But at the
Well, one of
same
the reasons, sorry, I don't know if you were done. I was just gonna say one of the reasons that Malazan is a series that people can dig into and talk about and discuss, and is because it's a series that invites you to explore questions. And it doesn't take necessarily a genius or intelligence or anything. It's just asking you to explore these questions, and the willingness to do that is all it takes. And that's why it's a series that people can talk about so much, because it does ask questions like, what is compassion? What is redemption? And it gives you scenarios to think about these things. That doesn't
and
take a genius. You don't have to be Einstein to think about those things.
and I was remembering back to a number of years ago, there was a very popular book, and it is, some people would derisively describe it as an airport book, that sort of thing. You're going on holiday, there's an airport bookshop, and you go, I just want something that, I can read and then look out the window. And a lot of that book, even though it's intended for adults, the language in it is not complex. It is straightforward. There's a lot of characters out, you are outright being told in the narrative what characters are thinking, why they are thinking it. Characters have very direct conversations, and a lot of the fun in those is you don't have to concentrate. It is, you can read when you're distracted, and even if you sort of your mind drifts away, you look down, you can easily find your place again. It's not complicated. The complication of what a lot of authors who write these styles of books do, because they're keeping their language simple, they do tricks with plot, and that,
Right.
oh, there's this twist, and then suddenly this thing happens, and then, oh, there's this thing, and that's what it's a page turner, that it's very simple. You're flicking through. There's nothing that's engaging your brain. It is chewing gum for the brain.
Right.
And there is nothing wrong with that. I have no problem with books like that. The problem I have is when people read books like that and then assume that all books should be like that, and
Mhm.
instead of being descriptive of that type of book, it becomes prescriptive about what books should be. But also the style of reading that you have for that, where you are being handed on a silver platter everything. And you go, right, because those books are designed to be read in that way. They are very surface level. And that's not to say that authors won't hide other things and they won't, be very careful with their constructions. But for the most part, the enjoyment of those books is from a surface level read. It's from finding out what happens next. Other books, on the other hand, are not written that way. And that is not a negative about them. It's, they are not intended to be read that way. So if you read something that way and go, but it's not explaining these things, you're like, yes, and but books should explain these things. I'm sorry, I missed that on the rules of how books are constructed. Um,
Where's that posted? Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
and then
No,
he came down from the mountain with the stone tablet saying books should explain stuff and things in a way that is perfectly tailored to the current reader of them.
yeah, so the presumption that all books should be the way I like them to be would result in a very boring world, I'm afraid. So yeah, there's a variety of stories and a variety of ways of telling stories and a variety of ways of engaging with stories. And I think it's a mistake to disparage one type and to say, no, this is how you have to do it, right? That would be exceptionally stupid to say to people. but to dismiss other ways of doing of engaging with stories because it's not the way I do it is that's just, you're missing out, right?
Yeah,
I sometimes myself want to just read for fun, a lighthearted, fun read. Your analogy, your food analogy is a great one. Sometimes you want a hamburger, in my case, a veggie burger, and sometimes you want a sometimes you want, I saw that. And sometimes you want a 7-course meal at a fancy restaurant, right?
yeah, and it's a bit like when we were talking about what Le Guin was saying about, like, from Elflin to Poughkeepsie, about the use of fantasy language. And
Yeah.
I recently had a commenter argued about this because they didn't listen to it all the way through. Um,
Uh-huh.
and they left a number of comments that have subsequently disappeared. Who knows why? But they gave the example of Sanderson and the Stormlight Archive. And when Sanderson doesn't need to use fantasy language, and I'm saying, I'm sorry, what's a thunderclast? That Yes, I was walking down to the local gas station and I asked for someone had parked their thunderclast outside, and that's fantasy language. That's using fantasy language to create a sense of the fantastic.
Wait, you don't have a thunderclast? I mean, I keep mine in my bedroom.
Well, unfortunately, I forgot to water mine and it died. But and then there's the character of Lift. So even within the Stormlight Archive, with a certain register of language, a certain diction level that the story is being told at, there is, even with Sanderson's stated goal of this transparent prose, there is a style and register of language that he is using. And then you have the
Right.
character of Lift. And Lift uses a different register, a different style, a different type of diction. And it's much closer to the modern vernacular. And people go, I don't like Lift. And part of it is it can feel jarring. Now, obviously, you can describe it as jarring as a negative or contrasting if
Right.
you're being less judgmental about it. Lift contrasts with the rest. If Sanderson's prose is absolutely transparent, how can there be a contrast? Because it's not. There is a style.
There
Um,
is. Yeah. And it's true that Lyft is, even from the perspective of many devoted fans of Sanderson and the Stormlight Archive, a not always loved character.
but
So
she's incredibly well written.
yeah,
And she's a lot of fun, and it's different, and
yeah,
it's really engaging. But what is fascinating about that is you can actually see, even in a text that is ostensibly very straightforward, mundane, prosaic language, that no, it's not. That's an illusion, because the language is evoking the sense of the fantastic. And when that language is changed with Lift, that illusion becomes much more visible.
yeah, yeah.
And that's the thing. That's what Le Guin was talking about. So where we draw the line about what is too archaic or what is too formal, that will shift over time. But the line is still there. That there is this tool that authors use, and this is part of what we do when we're doing analysis. Is you don't just look at it and go, oh well, this is just how fantasy is written. No,
Yeah.
there isn't any one style. It's a bit like when people say, well, the way that a story is structured is there's an introduction, then there's an instigating event, then there's the rise in action, then there's
Yeah.
the climax, then there's the fall in action, and then there's the denouement. And that's
There's the,
how you write and structure a story.
do I hear some sarcasm coming from the narratologist there, perhaps a little bit?
I have to dial up the sarcasm because apparently it doesn't translate well from my accent to American English.
Okay. Oh man.
But
But the one that gets me is prose. And I have heard it talked about as if it were some kind of disease or some kind of, you know, absolutely abstract thing that doesn't matter really in the real world at all. When in fact, the prose is the story. People who say, I don't care about prose, you do care. You just maybe don't realize that you do care about it, right? Because you wouldn't have that story without the prose.
And like a great illustration of this, take Hemingway and Faulkner.
Yeah.
So Hemingway, some people might describe his language as masculine and clipped and strong, and it's very, very clean, and in a lot of respects, is that kind of transparent prose.
Yeah.
Right. So that's Hemingway. Do you like Hemingway's story? Well, Hemingway stories are still incredibly complex because he
Right.
does a lot with implication. He does a lot with you're paying attention to when a character is looking at something. Why is that character looking at that thing? Why is their eye line traveling the way that it travels? Why do they
Mm.
say that? Hemingway really pays attention to that. And sometimes the word selection is so incredibly important
Yeah.
because he is being clipped and concise. Then you
Right.
take someone like Faulkner, and Faulkner, in a lot of his writing, is much more expansive, with longer sentences and these rolling sentences. There is a almost languid heat that is being evoked
Mm.
in Faulkner's control, and that is again fixed to what effect he is trying to achieve.
Exactly. No, I promise you that neither one of them got out of bed one day and said, I think I'll just write like this. We're talking about a lifetime of dedication and developing their styles and working on their prose to the point where they effectively convey what they want to convey. Now, as a reader, you can read their story without thinking much about it, but the effects are still happening in here, whether you're conscious of it or not. What we're talking about is the process of becoming more conscious of how that affects you as a reader and being able practicing articulating that.
Well, and we've all had that experience where we've been reading a story or been watching a film, and you go, "That's the bad guy."
Right.
Well, how did you know that's the bad guy? Um, how did I know that? I just know that that's the bad guy. How did you
Right.
know? And it's
I
you will
get
have
bad
picked
guy
up,
vibes. Yeah.
and you will have picked up from visual cues or language cues or body language, or there will be something that will have tipped you off. And then when the reveal happens, you're like, "Yes, I knew it." And the thing is, the person telling that story, the person who created it, was deliberately adding those things so that you would have that moment, and it wouldn't suddenly come out of nowhere. It's like, hang on a second, how are they the bad guy? That doesn't make any sense. That's just dumb.
Mm.
Because if there isn't enough foreshadowing, if there isn't enough laying the foundational groundwork for it, sometimes twists like that can really fall flat and feel artificial and contrived. And so you have to be able to signal it. But if you start out going, and then the bad guy entered, that kind of takes the subtlety out of it, takes the art out of it.
I am a barbarian. I am a bad guy.
And so we've all had that moment where we have intuitively understood something about a narrative, a text of some
Right.
description. We've had that moment. What analysis allows you to do is, as it is happening, you are picking up on these things, and you read it better, so you pick up on more clues and more things that are happening in the text, more subtle foreshadowing, and you don't need a lot of the overt stuff because you've
Right.
already picked up on it. And also, it allows you, when if someone asks you about it, you go, "Yeah, but do you remember that scene there where that thing happened? That's the turning point." Because up until then, there'd been that little hint and that little hint, and then there's this thing. How can you know that? Yeah,
Right.
I just watched it or I just read it. Like it, how can you not know it? And it's because it's
Yeah.
not spelled out on the page. And that's where we get into this surface level reading versus understanding what is being implied
Right.
and holding or internalizing a lot of that information. And it's not that you're trying to hold everything in your head all at once. It's you just internalize it and you recognize and understand as you're going along.
Yeah.
And that is this process of improving not only your ability to read in terms of speed. Speed is great, but there's no point in I'm great at the doggy paddle and I can do it really, really fast. Well, have you graduated to front crawl yet? No, but I can do the doggy paddle really, really fast. It's Well, learn front crawl, learn breaststroke, learn backstroke, learn the butterfly if you're a masochist. Um, that there are all of these different techniques, insisting on only one style, and then insisting that all books should cater to the fact that you've mastered that one style. And that's part of what I run into, and it is one of my frustrations, I think, with a lot of how books are discussed, where people act as if no, it you should explicitly be told all of these things. Why? I'm reading a book for adults. I'm not a child. And this is something we see quite often in younger aimed books. A lot of the information is more explicit, is more blatant, is more overt, because
Right.
it's to ensure that someone who is not as well practiced can understand the information. But I'm in my 40s now. I don't need that. I've been practicing reading for a while. And a lot of what I personally enjoy is when books are more subtle and I get to engage with them. And I'm not having everything spelled out to me like I am still 10 or 12 years old. It's like, I read those books back then. I don't need to read them now, particularly when they are ostensibly adult novels.
Right. That's the audience it's meant for. And one assumes that at that point in one's life, after practicing and practicing, that one enjoys some engagement. Let's go back to Malazan, and I'm not going to do spoilers here, but there are certain characters that are introduced, like say in Gardens of the Moon, that you expect, oh, that looks like the villain, but you quickly realize, okay, there's something else going on here. We're having some subversion of tropes going on in here. We're having some inversion even of tropes going on here. We're doing something a little more subtle than the usual here, aren't we? And that's early on given as many clues to the reader that you should expect to be asking questions about the usual here. And that's one reason, again, that people enjoy the series, because it's an invitation to think. It's an invitation to explore and look at other sides of things. That's
Yeah, and
that's what
again,
it is.
and it's not intellect dependent. It's not
No,
well, no matter how rubbish IQ tests are, but it's not to do with that.
right,
Not to legitimize an IQ test. There are major problems with that, but
right,
that's how people commonly understand it. It's not to do with your IQ. It Part of it is you want to read fantasy. You want to read something that's slightly different. Yeah, and you want to read fantasy that's not overt and directly telling you stuff. Right.
right,
And the thing is, all of these things exist on a spectrum, from really blatant and overt over here to completely obscured over here. And the books will move, even like within a book, there will be sections that'll be clear and sections that are more obscure. And
right.
we have personal preferences about what we want. But personally, I'm if I'm going to be sitting on a beach, I'm probably not going to be reading a Malazan book, because that's not the experience I want of just sitting relaxing on a beach.
Yeah.
The idea of me on a beach is quite frightening because sunburn. And I would be like the beacons of Gondor as soon as the light hit me. But let's say sitting by a pool in the shade, I could do that. But if
You
I'm
can do
doing that,
shit.
I'm looking for a book that is slightly different, that is easier, that I don't have to concentrate as much on, because it's a different reading experience. And I don't insist that all books conform to what I want or the situation that I am currently in. And it's a bit like some books really lend themselves incredibly well to audiobook because of the style that they may be written in, because of
Right.
the type of book that they are, because of the performance of an incredibly talented vocal performer who is doing the narration. Like all of these things can play into an audiobook being good. At the same time, some works that are brilliant literary works mightn't necessarily work as audiobooks
Yeah.
just because of
Yeah.
the style of writing and the mood that you are in. And it it's not to say that, oh well, they should all work as audiobooks. Why? That that seems strange. There are certain ones that work better
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
others.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that there are no authors ever in existence who aren't showing off how smart they are by putting in obscure references and that sort of thing. But I suspect that the vast majority of authors want their readers to figure things out, want their readers to contemplate these questions. I'm reading Book of the New Sun right now by Gene Wolfe. Okay.
Brilliant book.
It's brilliant. It's fun and it's challenging, and I'm enjoying the questions that Gene Wolfe is posing. I read an interview he did with someone, and he expressed how his fulfillment comes when readers figure things out. It's not that he wants to be obscure, he wants readers to think and see what he's doing. He's not trying to hide forever. He wants the readers to enjoy that process of figuring out what he's doing. And that is fun. It is actually a lot of fun to engage in that as a reader once you're accustomed to doing it. It can feel at first, I know a lot of people look at Malazan or Book of the New Sun and think this is just too much work. This feels like I'm having to I'm having to go to work or school or something, and I just want to relax. But I promise you, there's a point when you do something enough where it's pleasure. There are certain types of work that I've done in my life that have become pleasure. If I do them often enough, I get good enough at them, and it's very similar. So I think that Book of the New Sun is a great example of
Yeah.
of that sort of thing.
I'm sure when you first started playing tennis, you weren't the John McEnroe like figure you are now. And it was difficult and it was painful and you really struggled with it. But then
Oh
it
yeah,
became something you looked forward to playing.
absolutely. It's a joy to figure out how to put more backspin on the ball and hit a better drop shot. That just makes me happy. Like, wow. And when I first started, I didn't know what backspin was. I didn't know how to hold the racket properly, even to do it. So
I'm
it's,
just going
yeah,
to nod as if I'm agreeing with you because I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'll show you when we play tennis someday.
And this is the thing. I saw someone mention that, oh, if you're reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen, you need the PowerPoint. What's this need business? You do
No, no, no.
realize that thousands of people read these books before
Right.
Reddit existed, let alone someone posting a PowerPoint on Reddit.
Right.
Like, thousands of people read and enjoyed these books before that existed. But
Yeah.
I think part of it is if there's instead of having to do the thinking yourself, it's oh well, someone's already done the thought for me. I don't have to bother.
Hmm.
And it can be
Cliff
easy to slip
notes, Cliff notes or Spark notes.
it
Yeah.
can be easy to slip into that because if you have that safety net, then you go, oh well, I won't have to pay as much attention. And reading as a pastime has changed. It used to be quite solitary, and B, you sat down in the quiet and read. And now it's, oh, well, I'm listening to the audiobook while I'm out doing the errands, or, I'm doing a read along. So we read a chapter and then we get together to talk about it. There are all these different ways of enjoying and engaging with books.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But it's when the expectation is, well, this book should have been designed to maximize and optimize how I have chosen to engage with it.
Right.
And you go, but how did the author know that's what you were going to do?
Hmm.
Like, all of these are different ways to approach it. And if an author had in mind, as the majority of authors did up until very, very recently, even if it's not still the majority, but when you read, you sit down, you focus on the pages, and you
Yeah.
read. That you aren't doing other things, that you aren't doing it. This book is designed for a book club. Some books are. Some books are specifically designed to be broken up
Yeah.
into little pieces to be discussed along the way.
Right.
But most books aren't. And being aware of that is it's simple and straightforward, I think.
Yeah. The one thing I do want to emphasize too is no one should ever feel stupid because someone else saw something in a text that they didn't see. It's not a test. It's not like you're supposed to get everything right, and that kills the joy of the experience. The feeling that, oh, I didn't get that this was what was going on with this character. I must be a dummy. That's not what it is at all. It's really coming from a place of enjoyment. We're talking about enjoying the story. We're talking about a facet of engaging with stories that we find very fulfilling. And it's not that you're dumb if you don't get that. It happens to me all the time when I'm talking to people on this platform. They see things I didn't see. And I'm like, wow, that is so cool. You just made this story even better for me. Thank you. It's not, oh, I'm a dummy because I didn't see that. So I want to emphasize that people shouldn't feel stupid for not getting this metaphor or for not getting this symbol or missing this foreshadowing. It's okay. It's not a test. We're here to enjoy it. We're here to make it a richer experience for each other.
And I'm glad you're here, because it never would have occurred to me to emphasize that or say that, because that to me is a given. Like, we've had all these in-depth discussions about books, and you've said something, I've gone, huh, I never thought of that. That's really it. And you're excited about it because it's making you rethink something and see it in a different way. Other times, like, we've talked about things and suggest that, well, no, I don't think that works because of X, Y, and Z. You're like, oh, rats. But
it was fun. Anyway,
it's fun. Like, this is the kind of nerds that we are, that we nerd out about talking about stories this way. And it never occurred to me that, oh, well, I didn't say that. Oh, I'm just an idiot. I can't. None of us is omniscient. We cannot see and understand every single facet. There are Malazan readers out there who have read this series multiple times, or even they've only read it the once, and they have seen things and put connections together that have never occurred to me. And that's brilliant. That's amazing. I'm like, oh, I wish I'd seen that. And then when they explain it, you go, that is a brilliant point. How did I not see that? It's so obvious now.
Yeah.
And it's exciting and it's wonderful.
Right.
And that's part of the joy of all of these discussions, that it's not just about, well, this is what happened in the text. If that's all you want to know, just go and read a wiki summary.
Yeah, but I do fear that some people are reluctant to engage in what we're talking about because they've been made to feel stupid at certain points, maybe unfortunately in a classroom or something, for not getting what they're supposed to, I'm putting this in air quotes in case somebody's just listening, what they're supposed to get from it, right? That's the best way to ruin poetry, is to treat it like a puzzle that if you don't get the correct answer, you're wrong, and that's it, right? So I think that it's a way that we should approach all of literature as a process of exploration, and we all bring our own unique experiences to the story, and which, by the way, happens in here. The story happens in here. The author puts words on the page, but where it comes alive is in here. And you bring all that other stuff that's going on in here to that experience as well. And when you articulate some of that to me, you make it a better experience for me as well.
And I think that's our part of the deal. Authors create the works, and it is their story that is being communicated to us. But we're the ones doing the interpreting. It's a two-way street. Authors can miscommunicate, or they can have tried to communicate something and it hasn't quite worked.
Absolutely.
Because so many of their readers just didn't understand it. At the same time, it can be that readers can misunderstand a text because it is about communication. And no one is ever saying, you didn't think that when you read it. But sometimes when we say, well, this is what this scene means, or this is what happened here, or this is what this means, and you lay out your argument and someone goes, but hang on a sec, what about that thing, and that thing? Ooh, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
And that's where we as readers have to take that step back and sort of admit that sometimes our egos write checks that our reading ability can't cash. And yeah, we make mistakes. We're not infallible. And anyone who thinks they're an infallible reader, I think you might need to double check. Because none of us are infallible. And this idea that texts only mean what the reader gets from it. You go, but readers can misread, and we can't forget that. Like, we have to own our place in the process. The author is communicating something through the text,
Right.
and we are decoding and re putting it together and understanding it on the other
So
end.
yeah,
There are two places where this can go wrong.
that's right. Yeah. What I always tell my students is you bring your experiences to this. You might see things I don't see. And so you try to articulate your interpretation of this story. It's not that anything goes. You can't just say this can mean anything I want it to mean. That's not how it works. It has to be plausible. You have to make an argument for it. And then when you make an argument that seems persuasive enough, then yeah, you may have brought something to that text for other people. But it's not that you get to make it mean whatever you want. That
And
just isn't right.
and the thing is, we always talk about it. The meaning has to be constructed from the text. So when we talk about valid readings, it's about a construction and interpretation that is based in textual evidence and
Right.
isn't contradicted by other huge swathes of textual evidence. Because
Exactly.
then we could get into cherry picking and how someone go, oh well, it's just this thing, and you well out of
Yeah.
context, yeah, but in context, no, it's completely different. Um,
Right.
and that's the thing. It's one of the commonalities that I've found in a lot of literature people is the the fact that we accept multiple versions of text. We aren't going, this is the one meaning.
Right.
It must be this way, unless there is overwhelming evidence for it. And you look at this evidence, you cannot interpret the evidence any other way. Then you go, well, okay, so that little section is set in stone. So what did the book mean? Oh, well, then you're into a whole can of worms that certain scenes can have specific meanings. Certain
Yeah.
sentences can have specific meanings. But when you talk about how you generally interpret a book, there's a lot more flexibility there. And in discussion, we go, okay, well, uh, Starship Troopers by Heinlein's classic example. Is it pro-fascist or is it ironically anti-fascist?
Right. Right.
Depends on the reading of the text. Because
Hmm.
sometimes it is so overtly pro-fascist, you go, it's an exaggeration. And I know when I read it, I assumed that it was actually a critique of fascism.
Hmm.
But I know that other people saw that authoritarianism in it, that no, this is what he was trying to get. I don't know. I never talked to the guy. I don't know what his actual intent was. But you can put together the evidence for both arguments, and neither one is definitive. Verhoeven's film, on the other hand, yeah, that's decidedly anti fascist.
It's often the case that a symbol has multiple plausible interpretations. In fact, often a lot of good writers will deliberately insert a symbol that has different reverberations depending on how you approach it. So you could approach it in a new historicist manner or a feminist manner or whatever, use queer theory, whatever you want. I mean, there are so many different ways to approach that symbol, and each one can be compelling and interesting and open up the rest of the story in cool ways. So that is something that, in a more formalized manner, in a more, the further you go along in your education, if you're pursuing literature formally, you learn more and more about these different schools of thought. You don't have to do all that necessarily to enjoy your reading, but it's just an example of how you can approach something from different directions and get something different out of it.
And having that, all those different frameworks, the different critical lenses to apply, the different ways of winnowing through and sifting through the different information that's in a text, these are very flexible tools. And
Yeah.
we never say, oh, you must do this. Whereas quite often when people are unaware of all of these things, they go, oh, well, it's all just subjective. And they are dismissive. And you go, it's strange when I can get 15 people all to analyze this and they'll all come up with the same answer, and yet you think it's entirely subjective, that it's just whimsical. It's not whimsical. It's based in how to understand the text. And part of that are these tools, these techniques, these concepts. And the more we know about them, the more we practice them,
Right.
the more reflexive it becomes. And you've seen this where I have tried to explain a very short paragraph And people go, well, you spent 45 minutes talking about this one paragraph. Like, how you, because it takes that long to explain it when you're talking to an audience where you don't know if they already know the things that you know. But if I just assumed, again, everyone had the same, I would put the thing up on screen and go, yeah, so in reading this, like you get it's just these things, and then move on. And anyone who didn't have that background knowledge, but you didn't explain any of that, you go, but I don't need to because it's like it's all there.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I think what we try to do when we talk about books. It's not to say no one else is allowed to have an opinion. It's we try to
Oh gosh,
express our
no.
opinions. We try to show how we got to those opinions. We talk about the things that we enjoyed and how we interpreted them. That we try to show our love for it as part of a broader conversation. And we don't go, oh well, this book's just bad. Because again, we're not 5 years old. Um, we're adults
I'm
and
6 years old in here.
we can have these conversations. Like there are books that you go, I didn't enjoy that. Congratulations. Like
Yeah.
that's fine. Everyone has books like that. Oh well, it was badly written. You look at it and go, no, actually that's a fairly well written book. Like just looking at it, that's actually really good and that's compelling and this is very cleverly done. Yeah, but I didn't like it. Yeah,
Right.
that's fine. But not liking something is not the same as it being bad. And
Yeah.
I think it's that overly simplistic approach. Stories must have this structure. Stories must be told in this way. Stories must use this register. Stories must use this level of diction or literacy level. You go, it's as if someone has created all of these prescriptive rules
Mm.
and said, this is how things are done. And but that's not true. Go into any library and go to every 15th book for 20 shelves. Put them next to each other. They will be in different styles. They will use different approaches. They
Hmm.
will use different techniques, literary techniques. Story and narrative are nearly infinitely flexible. And this idea that there's one format, one style that must be done, and that is the only good way to do it,
Right.
is too
Exactly.
limiting.
Yeah. And take two books. One that was written to be entertaining, to be fun, to be a quick read. I don't know, Dresden Files book, or one of the early Dresden Files book, or one of the Drizzt books or something. These are written for entertainment and have done their jobs brilliantly. People love those books, and for good reason. It would be a mistake for me to complain incessantly about one of those books because it doesn't have deep literary symbolism, or because it doesn't subvert tropes the way I want that to be done. And all stories should do subvert tropes the way I want them to be done. That would be a mistake. It would also be a mistake for me to take something like Book of the New Sun and say, this is terrible because it's not entertaining me. It's there are not enough explosions here. I don't know what this is. I have to think about this. I don't like this. Right? It would be a mistake to do that to either text. So what we're talking about here is, I think, having the ability. You'll get more out of your experiences if you have the ability to do things on various levels. I think if you're equipped in that way.
And that's the thing, like the R.A. Salvatore Dritz books, like I loved when I was younger. They're
Yeah.
fun adventure stories. And the thing is, I have a video where I went through the prologue and I talk about the techniques that are being used. Are
Right.
these indicative of great writing? No, but they did what they were intended to do.
Right.
I did the same with Terry Goodkind. Terry Goodkind is certainly not one of my favorite authors. I am not I am not fond of that series, but millions of people are. Why?
Why?
Because he
Yeah.
used that technique and they didn't care that it was breaking the narrative rules. It was badly or poorly organized. They didn't because they just wanted to get through it. They were doing that surface level read, and that's how they were written. So Goodkin knew his audience, and that's fine. I can still talk about it in terms of the techniques and go, this isn't a particularly good technique. You probably, if you want the best writing possible, you probably shouldn't emulate this. But
Right.
if you're aiming at a certain audience, at a certain reading ability, with a certain attention span, and you're aiming at all of these things, you go, but this is what the market will bear, and I don't have to work any harder than this. Like that's good business in a
Mm.
capitalist society.
Oh,
It's
sure.
not necessarily good art.
Uh-huh. Yeah. But it has a function. It has a
Yeah.
function, however you rate it. And like you said, millions of people have engaged with the story and enjoyed it and feel passionate about it. So that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, and that's like I have no problem with that. But when people go, "This is good writing," that's
Uh-huh.
when I have a problem. Because I go, "No, no, that's not good writing. You can enjoy it, but if you're going to talk about it being good writing, let's go through it and go, look, this is how he breaks narrative perspective. This is where he's messing around with the timeline. This is an info dump that he has wedged in here. That's not good writing. That is writing in a way to that a lot of readers don't notice,
Right.
but is bad writing. And you can achieve exactly those effects in a
So
much more
the issue here is simply the word good is so vague. And I think what you maybe they mean is this is entertaining writing.
and but that's it. They don't point to it as I enjoyed this. You go, it's fine to enjoy it. But
Right.
the thing is, those the effects that he created in that introduction, and any other competent author could take that same introduction, they would rewrite it, they would restructure it, they would find their unique way to tell it, which is one thing.
Right.
But they could take his style and his approach and find a way to restructure it so that the information was embedded into the scene where it
Uh-huh.
flowed more naturally. And the thing is, all of those people that really enjoyed it the first time, they would still enjoy it because it's still doing the same things. All of those
Sure.
people that also like a story well told in not just a good story being told, those people would now enjoy it because it was now better written. It was being told better, and
Right.
it's that improvement. So recognizing techniques and being able to see where these things happen, and you go, authors do it for a reason. Quite often, that reason is they know that their readers don't care, so
Yeah.
why bother? But a lot of what I talk about and I try to get across is when we are looking at these things and we're trying to find really clever techniques or how someone does something, let's have a look at it. Let's talk about these things. And
Mhm.
what Goodkin did in that was not good writing,
Yeah.
but it achieved enough for his readership. And you go, right. So he was massively commercially successful.
Right.
Fantastic for him. But that's talking about the difference between the sort of the art, the craft of writing, and writing as a commercial aspect of, I want a big audience. I want to sell to a big audience. So I'm going to drop my register in it to about a 12-year-old level because that caters for a bigger audience and they can all enjoy it. And
Right.
I'm going to add in this thing because I know that. And then I'm going to have repetitions for information because I know people aren't paying attention and it's easier then. There are all these different tricks that authors play to make their work more commercially viable. And again,
Right.
no one has a problem with that. But it's when you point to it and say, no, no, it isn't. And you think, no, it is. Look, I can point to the evidence in the text.
Sometimes it's an economic decision that a writer realizes, look, I'm going to reach a broader audience if I pitch my writing at this level, at a slightly younger age level. And that's fine. There are other writers who are skilled storytellers who are not necessarily aficionados of the craft of writing. And that's great too. That there's plenty of that. And there are, frankly, some writers who are beautiful on the level of just prose and all that, but aren't great storytellers. And you'll find, I mean, the best case, of course, is when you have somebody who is really skilled at the
At all of
craft
them.
and is a good storyteller. That's the sweet spot. And that's, there's a handful of authors who are that, but there's
Did
a
you just
world
go,
of
and there's a handful of authors like me?
no, I was not thinking of myself at all, actually. But
And that's it.
yeah,
Like, ideally, the perfect author would not only be incredible at the telling of a story and creating a very compelling story, but they'd
right,
be incredible at the how it is being told and the crafting of it. That they would be brilliant about, and they would be brilliant at dialogue. They would be brilliant at exposition and description. They would be brilliant
Yeah.
at structure and plotting. That every single aspect they would be an absolute maestro with. That
Right.
is the ideal. The thing is, again, authors are human beings and they're not omniscient
Yeah.
and they're not infallible. That
Well, here's the thing. Look, you've got authors who are such good storytellers that they never really have to learn the craft of writing. It's like an athlete who's a natural. Babe Ruth, right? The guy was a natural. He could just smack the ball out of the park. He was kind of out of shape, right? I mean, he could rely on that natural talent without having to be all that. I'm sure he was very strong, but he could have been even a better athlete if he had worked out, if he had, maybe had a stricter diet, et cetera, et cetera, if he had worked harder at it. But he was just so natural. I think there are writers out there who are just natural, great storytellers who don't have to learn the craft or don't learn the craft, let's say, because they can rely on that natural storytelling ability. But anyway.
And again, like a lot of this comes down to, again, there are some things that'll always be preferences of mine and some that'll be preferences of yours. That
Sure.
we can still have conversations where we disagree about points. But,
Oh,
because
yeah.
clearly I'm always right. Um, uh, and that is the joy of literature. It engages you on an individual level, but because
Yes.
everyone else has access to it, we can share in these conversations. As long as we remember that meaning is rooted in the text.
Yeah.
And just because we don't see it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a failure on the author or the book's part. Sometimes it's we didn't see it. And sometimes it's not a feeling on our part, it's just a happenstance. We have to be forgiving of ourselves when we make mistakes, but we have to own up to the fact that yes, we can make mistakes. And it happens.
And enjoy it. Enjoy it. It's fun, right?
And that's like we enjoy learning, which is how we ended up spending extending our adolescence to ridiculous levels in grad school.
Yep. So AP, you ready to hit the gym?
I hate you. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I may thank my nemesis later, but I would like to thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I will see you in the next one.